Good afternoon, everyone. So some of you probably were present at the same session last year, so we'll know that this will be a little bit of a double act. We will both be presenting, and this will be, as much as possible, a comprehensive overview of what are the current clinical trials that are just closed in UK, either because were terminated or because they were completed, there are some results, or we will also give an update on the trials that are currently ongoing, those who are already completed recruitment and those who are still recruiting. And of course, there will be a little bit of time also to look into other trials that will be coming, so potential drug pipeline for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is a summary of the studies that have been completed that we will go through. And so we start with a study, not like a typical clinical trial. It's not enough? It's okay? Yeah? And this is not an interventional study, it was more an observational study. The results of the KIND-DMD have been published in 2022. So basically, this was like a wearable device that was measuring the activity of 21 children with Duchenne muscular dystrophy compared to 17 control patients with the age-matched control patients. And these children were evaluated at baseline, 6 months and 12 months. And there were some typical outcome measures that were collected, like the North Star assessment. But what was interesting is these wearable devices were measuring activities in real time, so real daily activities. And the conclusion of this study was that the data captured from these devices had a good correlation for what we can see in the typical outcome measure, but most importantly, were able to track changes in motor activities, so they could anticipate, for example, a progression of the disease, and also could be suitable potentially to look at the response to treatment. This other study, again, is not an interventional study. This was a questionnaire that was completed by the family of patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And it was a questionnaire to look, when we do clinical trials, when we do assessment, we use the typical outcome measure that we know better and are used worldwide, like the North Star, the upper limb, 6-minute walk. But it's very difficult to understand what is the minimal clinical important difference when there is 1 point more or 1 point less or 2 points less. So there were these questions that were administered to the families and trying to look whether we can understand when we see 2 points difference in a scale, if this corresponds to a significant difference in the activities and the perception of the family in how these activities are changing. And this study showed that actually there was a good correlation of these questionnaires. So this is a way to have a better insight and trying to understand even better the progression of the condition and what it means when we report back to family points on specific scales.
Yeah, let's continue the overview of the trials that have been completed. This is the 4DMD study that probably many of you have already heard about. It was discussed also during the corticosteroid sessions early this morning. It essentially was an important study that has just been this year published, led by academic institutions, because you know that this was essentially the steroids are the only medication that we can consider standard care for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. But there was at the time, especially at the time when this study was designed several years ago, a lot of uncertainty which could be the best steroid type. You know that we have in UK the Flazacort or prednisolone, which could be the best regime to use, intermittent, daily In other countries, we also have weekend-only regimes, so very a lot of variety, and this was aimed to see, okay, let's try to recruit naive boys who are not on steroids between 4 and 7 years, and let's monitor them for 3 years. The patients were randomized either to take daily deflazacort, 0.9 milligrams per kilograms, which is the currently recommended dose, or prednisolone daily, 0.75 milligrams, or intermittent regime, 10 days on and 10 days off. And the patients were followed for 3 years, and the results have been published very recently, showing that the daily regimes, irrespective of either deflazacort or prednisolone, were those associated with better motor outcomes at the end of the 3 years, so able to improve or maintaining the motor function assessment compared to the intermittent regime. Of course, there were also information related to the side effects profile. We know that, for example, growth restriction is more associated with deflazacort, or weight gain might be more associated with prednisolone, irrespective of daily versus intermittent. But it was a very important milestone that now, as a network of clinicians around the country, will lead to somehow an update of the standard of care, because, of course, we don't want anymore to see this diversity in the approaches. We want to be able to offer to the families possibly 1 or 2 options based on the evidence that we have so far, based on the safety profile that we have so far, especially because now also for kids that want to be recruited for clinical trials, steroids is part of the recruitment criteria, and also patients should already be on a stable dose of steroids to be able to be recruited in clinical trials. This is another important study. Despite we have already heard that, unfortunately, the study did not meet the primary endpoint, but we all think that it was very important because, again, it was a sort of academic-led study based on the principle that if we have heard that all these medications are very expensive, all this treatment, gene therapy and so on are very expensive. And while this is good, if we manage to find a treatment to delay the progression of the disease, if there is already something that is available on the market because it's already approved for another indication, we could possibly accelerate the access to patients. And this is what also the big health authorities like EMA, MHRA, FDA considered as drug repurposing or repositioning. So a drug that is already on the market, approved for another indication, like the case of tamoxifen that is a very known anti-cancer medication approved for breast cancer, but based on the preclinical evidence on mice that there was a benefit to improve the muscle pathology, it was decided to trial and to test it in the patient population. So there were more than 84, I think, patients recruited, as you see here, between 7 years and 12 years old, also some non-ambulant patients up to 16 years old. And the primary endpoint was one of the domain of one of the scale, which is called MFM. There was a placebo arm because we know that the best way to demonstrate the effect of a drug is to have a placebo arm, so that you basically randomize in a double-blind way the patients, either in the treatment arm or in the placebo arm. And this is the very recent publication published in a very highly impacted journal, showing that there was no effect demonstrated at the end of the 48 weeks treatment between the treated patients and the placebo patients. But again, it was important because it demonstrated that somehow there is still room to use, drug repurposing as a potential strategy to use also for, possibly in combination with other medication. And it was a big effort, led by the academic, by the charities, by the advocacy groups, and so on. We have already heard about also vamorolone, which is a steroid-like type of medication that has been somehow developed to reduce the side effects of steroids. And we have had several studies performed in patients. This is the phase 2b study that lasted 6 months, in which 24 weeks, in which patients were randomized to receive either the low dose, so 2 milligrams, or the high dose, 6 milligrams of vamorolone. Other patients were randomized to the normal steroids, which was prednisolone daily, and another group of patients was randomized to take placebo for 24 weeks. And then all the patients were switched to receive the vamorolone, either the low dose or the high dose, in the extension study, to continue to collect long-term effects on safety and efficacy of vamorolone. And I'm going to share with you some of these preliminary data about the first 6 months, where essentially the aim was to show that compared to placebo, there was a benefit, a clinical benefit. Here, the primary endpoint to demonstrate the efficacy was the time to stand. And you can see here that the 6 milligram, this is the placebo, that essentially showed either, during the 6 months, a stability or a mild decline in this functional testing, while both the low dose and, most importantly, the high dose showed a significant improvement in the time to stand from the floor, which is a very sensible outcome measure, especially in such a short period of time. And this was, there were no, in terms of, this is in terms of efficacy, and in terms of safety, there was no decline, as you see here, in height, and this was important in particular when comparing with the standard steroids that we know are mostly associated with other such side effects like height restriction. And initial data show that in terms of bone health, vamorolone might be safer because all the biomarkers measuring bone status were better preserved. So an initial good message to say this seems to be better in terms of safety for the bones. And of course, based on this data, I think that you are aware of the fact that FDA just a few weeks ago gave the approval of the drug from 2 years onwards. EMA also very recently gave this recommendation, to go ahead with a possible evaluation for approval, and we are waiting at the end of the year, the final outcome from EMA, and to clarify what is going to happen also in the UK landscape.
Thank you. So for those who were early here, this is a study looking at the exon skipping strategy, in particular the exon 53 skipping. This study that was completed was a phase 1-2 study, and it was a quite a long clinical trial. And again, there was the endpoint, if you like, to look again at the function of these patients. And there was also the importance to look at the possibility of adverse events, so the safety of this compound. This trial was completed, was done in a few sites in UK because it was an early phase study, so the number of patients recruited was not a big number of patients. Currently, what is happening is that there have been some initial, if you like, publication that there is some efficacy or effect, biological effect of this treatment, that is golodirsen, in patients with Duchenne. But what is the long-term effect is still not completely understood. Later, I will present some more slides of if you like, continuation of this study. So we will go more in details into this approach. This is the Sarepta extension study, as I was mentioning. These are two different compounds because they target two different exon skipping, so different mutation for this group of patients. This was a phase 3, so more patients were involved in these studies. And again, the important aspect was there was the necessity to still look into potential side effects. So safety was a very important aspect of this study. And the age of patients was quite wide in this group of patients. And as we heard earlier today, some of these treatments have been approved by the FDA and are potentially given under compassionate use for patients who have completed the clinical trials.
This is a very recent study that is open to recruitment and essentially target the inflammatory process involved in the muscle pathology of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's still based on the antisense technology that Annemieke mentioned earlier on today, but instead of targeting the genetic deletions, it targets one of the component of the inflammatory process. So the aim is to target this specific pathway to reduce the inflammation that is a consequence, of the lack of dystrophin. It will be a phase 3 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study, followed by an open-label extension. And the duration of the study overall will be 18 months, mainly in non-ambulatory patients at the moment. Of course, the aim is to demonstrate, first of all, the safety, but also to start looking at the efficacy of this drug. You see here listed a few centers that are recruiting, but of course on the DMD hub there will be more information. This is done.
So this is also an ongoing trial that is currently recruiting. The sites are mentioned here, Leeds and Newcastle, and Great Ormond Street Hospital is going to open hopefully in the next couple of months for recruitment. This is a trial targeting patients with exon 51 skippable mutation, and the compound again is a compound that has a specific backbone that is aiming to target more specifically the muscle cells and to skip the exon 51 at the nucleus level in the muscle cells. So the idea is that this backbone might have a better uptake into the muscle cells, so to have better skipping and potentially better dystrophin production. The age range of patients that are going to be recruited in this study is again quite wide compared to other studies, 4 to 16 years old. And there will be ambulatory and non-ambulatory patients that could be recruited for this study. And it is really important to understand that, again, this is a phase 3 study. Although we will be looking into efficacy for this study, but we will continue to look at safety data as well. As many other studies with exon skipping, the infusion are done on intravenously, and there will be evaluation of dystrophin production to look into that so as well. And again, the recruiting sites is still updating, so have a look at the DMD Hub website. In the next few weeks there might be some more information. This is it is an interesting story, and I don't know, many of you might know that there was a wave exon skipping study that was interrupted probably a couple of years ago, because there was the primary endpoint was the production of dystrophin, and this was not met. This is a wave has come back with a potentially improved backbone again. So the hope is again that there will be a better intake at the muscle cells level. These are early stage clinical trials, so few patients have been recruited. So if you like, it's one of those studies that starts as a proof of concept. So we need to see if this backbone is better than the previous one. So currently only Oxford is recruiting. And there were some presentation of this backbone on a mice model that were very, very promising in terms of the drug intake and the production of dystrophin. But of course, we need to, first of all, look at the safety in this study. But I think we might be seeing this study to progress into a different phase soon.
We know that eteplirsen was the first antisense to be approved by FDA for patients eligible to exon skipping 51. But again, as it was mentioned several times, one of the problems is that even if we see a possible effect on the level of dystrophin, and this is why FDA has approved the drug, we don't know how this would translate into a clinical benefit. So this is why, for example, EMA is waiting for the results from phase 3 studies, where you compare patients with untreated. One of the possibility to improve the distribution, so how much of this drug go to the muscles, is to, of course, try to increase the dose, and this is exactly what the study called Mission is going to achieve. So they will be using eteplirsen for patients eligible for exon skipping 55, but with a higher dose, with the purpose to try to improve the biodistribution of the drug to the muscle, so to increase also the production of the dystrophin protein. On top of interventional studies, as we have seen, there are also other studies that are also very important to understand better the disease. And Geneton is currently performing one of these studies, which is actually a natural history study that is aimed to understand better the disease progression during the first few years of life. And this is aimed to somehow feed back the gene therapy trial that Geneton is also sponsoring, because of course we know that there is a lot of variability between patients, and especially in the early stages, and how will be the trajectory. So if we have more data to understand and to monitor the progression of the condition, we would understand much better what to expect after we start a possible treatment, after a certain point. And this is exactly what this natural history study is aimed to achieve. The BIND study is another natural history study, if we want, that aims to clarify the effect of dystrophin on brain. We know that, of course, individuals with Duchenne in some cases may also have some neurodevelopmental comorbidities, learning difficulties, and so on. And we know that some isoforms of the dystrophin are important for the functioning of the brain. And this is what this study is aimed to achieve, to try to describe much better and phenotype much better what are the comorbidities involved in the expression of dystrophin in the brain. There is also the aim to develop some specific questionnaires that could be easily filled up to understand the level of these comorbidities. And the brain, this is a similar project that essentially aims at investigating further the role of dystrophin in the brain, to see which are the specific neuropsychological domains that are mostly affected, if it is memory, if it is attention, if it is planning, and so on. So to better characterize what is the neurodevelopmental phenotypes of individuals with Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
I think what is important of these particular studies that, again, interventional studies where there are treatments that are trialed are very important, but we should not forget that the physical activities, rehabilitation is equally important to maximize the effect. And this study, which is still recruiting, is interesting because it's basically finding a way to make the physiotherapy exercise a more pleasant, immersive experience for the patients. And I think this will be really, really important in seeing whether this could be implemented in the clinical practice, whether it will be feasible, and whether this guarantees that there is a program of exercise and activities that they can be followed with much more attention or motivation and be more pleasant for patients. This is a natural history study that is, if you like, is again not looking at the specific interventional treatment, but is more a study that is looking at if there are other genetic modifiers that have a level of implication in how the trajectory of patients run. This is a study looking at biomarkers, which are biological markers, basically to look at the status of an organ or a tissue in that specific moment. And biomarkers can be, again, used either to predict a trajectory or a progression of a condition, but can also be used to monitor therapeutic response, in whether this biomarker go higher or lower. This could be something that could be monitored. The more known my biomarker in Duchenne is the CK, creatine kinase. These are genetic modifiers, so there could be other genes that could have either a favorable or non-favorable effect in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, changing the trajectory. And this study is still recruiting, and basically what is asked from patients is to obtain a sample to get DNA extraction, and this could be done in clinic when patients come to do blood for clinical reasons. So we were not asked to do additional research samples. This is done at the same time when patients come for clinical bloods. Again, as said before, this is another study looking at the efficacy, or if you like, it's more complex than just efficacy. It's about motivating to have physical activities. Here they're looking at physical and mental well-being, introducing hydrotherapy. Hydrotherapy is something that very often is mentioned in the clinical setting. It's something that very often we say would be good for our patients to move better, to preserve the muscle strength, to preserve joints. But again, I think you will probably realize that not everybody has the possibility to access hydrotherapy. Not everybody is prescribed hydrotherapy session. I think it will be good and interesting to see whether we can have some more solid data to push more into the system, and if it's really having a good impact on these patients, we should be able to prescribe it as you would prescribe a treatment, and this should be followed as part of the standard of care. We completed the study that are still recruiting right now, and we look into the studies that are still ongoing. So we don't have results yet, but have completed the recruitment. And I think Giovanni starts this first.
Yeah, this is still, again, from Sarepta, using the exoskipping 51 as a strategy. But again, with the aim to improve the possibility to target the muscles and to facilitate that more drug is delivered to the muscle, This is one of the approaches that was mentioned earlier today, modifying or adding a peptide, like a protein that can link to the muscle cells, so that this can facilitate the fact that the antisense is entering the cells. And this is aimed to increase not only the efficacy in terms of production of protein, but of course may lead also to the reduction of the intensity of the administration. You know, we know that antisense, the normal antisense exon skipping needs to be delivered, given every week, basically a weekly infusion, while in this way the frequency can be reduced, and currently in this trial is one every 4 weeks, the infusion. So not only we can possibly see an increase in the efficiency in targeting the muscles, but also, you know, reducing potentially the burden associated with the frequency of the infusion. And this is ongoing. Of course, the recruitment has been completed. As you see here, 3 sites in the UK have been involved, and we are waiting for the results. NS Pharma is another company, a Japanese company that is running this trial, RACER 53, for exon skipping on 53. And actually, it was mentioned today that is one of the a molecule that was approved by FDA, but the trial is still ongoing, the phase 3 trial, in which patients were randomized for 1 year of treatment, and now we have the follow-up extension phase, in which, of course, after the initial phase, double-blind, all patients are receiving the medication.
So this is the long-lasting Sarepta Sense study that was looking. It's a combined long extension study looking at the compound skipping exon 45 and exon 53. This was the phase 3, so we were looking at efficacy and again continue to look at potential adverse event. The study is fully recruited. As I said, some of these compounds have had FDA approval, and currently, it was said also in the morning, currently we don't know what is the real trajectory of these patients in the long term with this treatment. So it's not approved, it's not EMA, don't have EMA approval, and the study is still continuing, and there is the possibility again to access under a sort of a compassionate use. Italfarmaco, so this is an extension, so the double-blind placebo-controlled phase has finished, and this is a long extension study, is a phase 2-3, is currently ongoing, but the recruitment is closed. The original study was for ambulant patients only, but some of these patients have lost ambulation in this study. What is, I think, important to remember is that last year there was an interim analysis on the givinostat compound, which again is a, if you like, an anti-inflammatory compound, and there were some positive trends in different outcome measures. So what is, I think, is interesting to see is that probably this compound will go further in terms of there will be other trials looking at older patients and non-ambulant patients, as well as there is the willing to do a study in younger patients, because this was above 6 years old. Seeing the positive trend, there was an announcement in this summer that the group has filed for FDA rapid review of the data. So this could be an encouraging add-on treatment for these patients, and is not a substitute of steroids. Patients who are in the clinical trial, they're also on steroids, so wouldn't be a substitute. But is among a number of studies that were terminated with either inconclusive or negative results, this interim analysis was actually encouraging, and I expect there will be more studies and longer studies with this compound in different age range.
This study is not interventional. You know that we are always, as researchers, looking for biomarkers, so like reliable measurements that can really detect a possible change, in case we have a medication that we have to test. And we know that creatine is metabolized essentially into the muscles, so it's a way to trace the amount of muscle bulk that is present, so that we can correlate this with motor function, and potentially can become an easy biomarker to be tested just on a blood sample. So it's a study that was performed in Newcastle and has fully recruited, so we are looking forward to see the results in the near future. This is the natural history registry for Translarna Ataluren. We have heard that following the conditional approval from EMA, the drug was also approved conditionally in the UK, and so this registry was started to collect the long-term safety and efficacy of the drug. Of course, all the patients that are currently in the UK taking the medication, and I think that there are more than 90 patients or so currently in the UK, are continuing to take the medication, and the clinicians that regularly see these patients upload all the data into the registry, because as we have heard earlier this morning, it will be important to understand this alongside, the data that we have from the clinical trials. We can show if there is any significant impact in the real world once we give the medication to the patients. This is also a single-center study done in Newcastle that has completed the recruitment, and essentially we know that prevention of contracture is also important, and we all prescribe splints at night to prevent the progression of the ankle contractures. This was to show if there was any difference with what is called here contracture control devices, which is a more mobile splint that potentially could be more comfortable to wear, because it was wear only for 2 hours per night instead of several hours per night. And again, we look forward to hear about the results, if there was any difference at the end of the study on the outcome, which is the prevention of the ankle contracture. These are the...
So these are just a quick overview of the project that have been terminated. So this was a clinical study that was conducted in one site in UK, and the fibrogen lelanthus again was a anti-inflammatory compound, was an inhibitor of the connective tissue growth factor. So the idea was that would reduce the fibrotic process. The study was done in 2 groups of patients. It was done in older patients, and therefore there were the main outcome measure were on upper limbs, respiratory function, and cardiac MRI. Unfortunately, the study was terminated because the primary endpoint were not met. And a similar study was done in younger patients. So those were ambulant patients. And again, the primary endpoint were a lot in terms of motor abilities, but also respiratory function. And unfortunately, also the primary endpoint was not met for both of the studies. So the study were terminated. There are a number of clinical trials that are still recruiting patients, but this will be patients that have participated in a previous phase of the study. And we will just give an overview again of these studies.
Yeah, essentially we have included here the RACER 53 extension phase, the study on with by NS Pharma with exon skipping 53. So all patients that have completed a year of treatment are continuing 2-year extension on the medication, and we will wait to hear, where this will lead. If there is enough data to say, okay, we are going to file for the approval, or if there will be any other possibility of post-trial access to continue the medication, as it was the case, for example, of some of the other exon skipping, where the medication are continued in those patients who are recruited in clinical trial on a compassionate use base, but we don't have a clear pathway yet. But just to say that this study is still ongoing and is continuing to collect the data on the long term. Now, the final overview on gene therapy. We know that there is a lot of news about this, a lot of expectation. So let's see what is going on here. The Sarepta EMBARK study, that was the phase 3 study to show effect of this gene therapy compared to placebo. It was mentioned already earlier today that based on the initial study, FDA gave the approval, conditional approval for 4 to 5 years. And there was a lot of expectation about these results. And this is the interim analysis from which only recently the results have been shown. Still, there is a lot of things that we need to understand, of course. The press release was that the primary endpoint, meaning the North Star, that the North Star scale assessed the global abilities of the children. And these were all kids between 4 and 7 years that were on stable, quite high dose of steroids initially. So at the end of the year, duration of this study, compared to placebo, there was no statistically significant difference in the total North Star score, which was the primary endpoint. So formally, what was considered the primary objective, the primary endpoint of the study, was not achieved. However, a number of other secondary endpoints, including 2 items of the North Star that, as you know, are the time raising from the floor and the 10-meter run that we normally perform in clinic, were significantly different in the children treated. So there is still a lot of imbalance and uncertainty on how to interpret this information, and this is also very partial, because this is what so far the company has shared. We know that there is a lot of additional analysis that is ongoing, also in terms of the production of the protein in the muscles, in the treated versus the untreated. If there are other aspects, other outcome measures that show any differences between the placebo and the treated arm. So, I think that in the next few months, we will still have a lot of intense work to how to interpret this data. I think we should keep our nerves very tight and wait as long as we don't have additional information about this. Similarly, Pfizer has the ongoing phase 3 trial with gene therapy, in which, again, patients this is also fully recruited in 3 centers in the UK. These were also kids between 4 years and below the age of 8 years, all on steroids. And there was a placebo arm, of course. It is a 2-year study in which the first year, of course, the patients are either randomized into the treatment, so receiving the single infusion of gene therapy, or placebo, and then the following year they roll over to the other arm for the following year. So it's a 2-year study, and we don't have, of course, the results available yet.
This is a microdystrophin. Geneton is the sponsor, gene therapy. This is a bit of a complicated, you can see here, phase 1, 2, 3 is currently in an early phase, and there are 2 sites that are recruiting patients. This is a particular study because it's designed in a way that there will be different parts of the study, and the initial parts will be mainly looking into safety of these patients, and there is still a dose determination to try to understand what is the best dose with less adverse events, and then the study will continue to progress with the evaluation of the efficacy and the safety on the dose that has been selected. And the patients that will enter the, if you like, the third part of the study, which is again long-term safety and efficacy, will be those that were enrolled in the first two parts. This is a study for slightly older patients. The previous study was up to 88 years old. This one is for ambulant patients, but up to 10 years included. And of course, there are some specific inclusion criteria in terms of what is the baseline abilities of the patients to start with. And this is not to discriminate, but it is really important to have as much as possible an homogeneous group recruited in this trial. So the North Star score needs to be more than 18 points. And the Gowers, which is the maneuver from rising from the floor, needs to be less than 7 seconds. And that helps to sort of target a specific population that we know are not going to deteriorate very fast. And of course, as Giovanni mentioned several times, the corticosteroids treatment should be already present and established in this group of patients. The primary outcome measure will be, again, looking at the motor function of these patients, but as you can see, there is a number of tests. It's not only the North Star, there will be the 6-minute walk, the 6-minute walking test, the 10 meters walk, and there will be other assessment like myotools, and there will be respiratory test and the muscle MRI, again, to look into the well-being, but also the efficacy of this treatment. Giovanni.
Yeah, this is just to mention, we know that much more will be coming from also, especially in terms of gene therapy. But these two studies that we are aware it should be quite imminent in the UK are essentially the Sarepta gene therapy for the non-ambulant patients or late ambulant patients, which is the first study, essentially called the Envision. And then we have the ENVOL study that essentially is targeting the very young children below the age of 4 years. It's very preliminary information, but something that definitely we will hear more about in the near future.
And to close this session, there are other studies that are currently in the pipeline, and there is the interest for this study to be opening in UK. These two on top here will be exon skipping strategies, studies. The WAVE is the one I mentioned earlier, so the one that is currently only in Oxford, and it was a phase 1AB, but there were some encouraging data. So as I mentioned earlier, there is the expectation that there will be further studies. And the Italfarmaco, as I said before, there is this Ulysses study that is going to look into patients who are non-ambulant patients, so older patients. And I think there will be 3 sites, 2-3 sites have been selected in UK. The thing I want to mention is that the information that we are sharing today are all information that are present in the DMD Hub website. So I realize that this is quite a lot of, going through different clinical trials, but all that we mentioned today, you can be found in the DMD Hub, so you can look into trials that are still recruiting, and also what is the pipeline, and will be regularly updated, so you can have update through the site.
And we would like to thank Phil Camish and Emma Heislop from DMD Hub that have provided a very thorough information about all this pipeline, and you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for such a detailed analysis of the clinical trial. That was brilliant.